A Course in
What?
with Cynthia Morgan.
Hi, course friends. Welcome to A Course in What? I'm Cynthia Morgan, and this is a podcast in which I read and discuss the text of A Course in Miracles. And this is podcast episode number 6. And we are reading chapter 1, The Principles of Miracles. And before I continue with Miracles 36 through 50, and finish up that section, I wanted to answer a question that I received, and that is a question that I think any student of A Course in Miracles asks themselves at some time or another. Why is the Course written in such a manner that it's difficult to understand? Why isn't it written more simply? And I think the answer to that is that A Course in Miracles is a spiritual path, and like all spiritual paths, it takes time and study and application. I mean, people spend years in monasteries studying Buddhism, Hinduism, all those sorts of spiritual paths or religions. And A Course in Miracles really is no different. It's a lifelong study program. And I think if it was written any simpler, then we would all just read it and be done with it. And it wouldn't really have the profound effect that it has when you sit down and read the sentences and reread the sentences because they don't make sense and reread them again. And as you continue to reread these sentences, what you find is that you have breakthroughs, and all of a sudden something makes sense to you that it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense the first time that you read it. So I think that we can trust the way that A Course in Miracles came to us and the reason why Jesus wrote it in the form that he did, that he actually says that careful study is necessary for this course. And I think that applies across the board to any spiritual path. Again, I think no one would really study it if it were any simpler. Okay, so let's continue with the Principles of Miracles with number 36. I'll read the principle and then say a few words about it. 36. Miracles are examples of right thinking, aligning your perception with truth as God created it. So right thinking is another way of saying right-minded thinking. That's a term that the Course uses as well throughout, right-minded thinking. And that's thinking with the Holy Spirit, not the ego. So the miracle aligns your mind with God, aligning your perception with truth as God created it. 37. A miracle is a correction introduced into false thinking by me. It acts as a catalyst, breaking up erroneous perception and reorganizing it properly. This places you under the atonement principle, where perception is healed. Until this has occurred, knowledge of the divine order is impossible. So in the first sentence, when we read thinking by me, again, that's a reference to Jesus speaking about himself. So when the separation occurred, A Course in Miracles tells us that God gave us the answer with a capital A, and that answer was the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is a principle. It's a thought in your mind, connecting you back to the love of God or the truth and oneness in your mind. And so Jesus has become a symbol of the Holy Spirit. You don't need to use Jesus as your symbol. You can use this more vague idea of the Holy Spirit. Again, if you do have issue with using Jesus, you can change that name, or you can just use the Holy Spirit. But you might want to look at why Jesus brings up resistance in you. And for all of us, that is always unforgiveness on some level. So again, so when he says that it's introduced into false thinking by me, it's another way of saying by the Holy Spirit. Sentence 2, erroneous perception is the belief in separation, seeing our problems in the world. So when it says it, meaning the miracle, acts as a catalyst, breaking up erroneous perception and reorganizing it properly, that's just saying it breaks up the belief in separation. In other words, it breaks up the belief that all of us have, which is that our problem is on the physical level and our problem is in the world, rather than seeing that the problem is my separation from God and the resultant guilt in my mind because of that. And again, in sentence 3, the atonement principle, that's another way of saying the principle of undoing the ego. So this places you under that principle of undoing your ego where perception is healed. Again, perception is a term associated with the ego, so that's when those ego thoughts are healed. Until this has occurred, as it says in sentence 4, knowledge of the divine order is impossible. So knowledge is a word synonymous with heaven, and it's the opposite of perception or the ego. And knowledge is always of God. So until this has occurred, knowledge of the divine order is impossible. In other words, the knowledge of God, the knowledge of love is impossible. 38. The Holy Spirit is the mechanism of miracles. He recognizes both God's creations and your illusions. He separates the true from the false by his ability to perceive totally rather than selectively. So the Holy Spirit is the mechanism of miracles, meaning that, again, once we had that separation, the Holy Spirit was the answer. In other words, it's that thought of love. It's the thought of the remembrance of God that goes with us into the dream. And it's the part of our mind that's always awake. We can never be fully asleep because there's always a part of our mind that's awake, and that is the part connected to the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is just the name the Course is given to that part of our mind, which is still at one with God. So it's the mechanism of miracles because we have to ask. We need to have the little willingness to have that shift of perception. So we need to come to the Holy Spirit rather than the Holy Spirit coming into the world and doing something in the world. We need to go back to the light in our mind, which then heals our perception and heals the situation. In sentence 2, he recognizes both God's creations and your illusions because once we had that thought of separation, that's the part that bounces between God and the illusion. It's the part of our mind that sees what we're going through on this level 2 level of duality in the dream, but it also recognizes the truth, the level 1 reality that all of this is an illusion and that only love is real. And that's why it recognizes both God's creations and your illusions. In sentence 3, he separates the true from the false by his ability to perceive totally rather than selectively. His ability to perceive totally, meaning seeing the entire problem, seeing it from both level 1 and from level 2, rather than selectively seeing it from only the perspective of the ego or the illusion. 39. The miracle dissolves error because the Holy Spirit identifies error as false or unreal. This is the same as saying that by perceiving light, darkness automatically disappears. So the miracle dissolves. That word dissolves is just another way of saying it corrects, it undoes, it atones for the error. And in sentence 2, this is the same as saying that by perceiving light, darkness automatically disappears. When we perceive the light, that's perceiving the Holy Spirit, the love in our mind, and the darkness, obviously the ego, is what disappears. It's like turning on the light in a darkened room and the darkness automatically disappears. It's the same when we choose that right-minded response. All of a sudden, the illusion of separation disappears. 40. The miracle acknowledges everyone as your brother and mine. It is a way of perceiving the universal mark of God. So in that first sentence, the miracle acknowledges everyone as your brother and mine. That's because the miracle undoes that belief in separation. And once we undo that belief in separation, we are acknowledging that there's only one of us here. When it uses the term brother, that's really meaning the entire sonship, which includes everyone and everything. And in sentence 2, the universal mark of God is another way of saying the Christ in all of us, that connection of oneness. 41. Wholeness is the perceptual content of miracles. They thus correct or atone for the faulty perception of lack. So you may recall that the ego is founded on the scarcity principle, meaning that the ego tells us that we are lacking and there isn't enough in the world to fill us. And that gives rise to that desperation and that vicious seeking that we often do in the world, that leads to addiction and all kinds of things. So the opposite of the scarcity principle is wholeness, is remembering that you are complete and that nothing has happened on one level. When it says wholeness is the perceptual content of miracles, what that means is that when you shift your perception, which is what a miracle is, from fear to love, let's say about somebody in your life, and you forgive that person, you then remember the wholeness. You remember the truth that you are complete, that nothing has happened on the level of reality with a capital R. In sentence 2, they, meaning the miracles, thus correct or atone for the faulty perception of lack. You recognize in that forgiveness that you are whole, that there isn't anything lacking within you. 42. A major contribution of miracles is their strength in releasing you from your false sense of isolation, deprivation, and lack. Now that's sort of like what we were just talking about in number 41. And when it says your sense of isolation, that means your sense of isolation, not just from God, but from each other, from everything and everyone. And on a physical level, yes, our bodies are separate from each other, but A Course is talking to us on the level of our mind, the eternal level, and there is no separation on that level. So the sense of scarcity, thinking with the ego, is what leads us to a sense of deprivation. And the miracle then joins you in that connectedness and wholeness. And that's why their strength is in releasing you from that false sense of isolation. 43. Miracles arise from a miraculous state of mind or a state of miracle readiness. And when it says in that sentence, from a miraculous state of mind, that's another way of saying from your right-mindedness, where the Holy Spirit resides. Or a state of miracle readiness. Again, I see that as the little willingness that the Course asks of us. So our miracle readiness is preparing ourselves for the miracle by asking the Holy Spirit. And in that asking, we're giving the little willingness that's needed to shift our perception. Because again, the Holy Spirit isn't just going to come in and shift your perception for you. Otherwise, we would all already be healed. So that's why the Course takes a lot of study and practice, just like any spiritual path or any path of healing, whether you're in traditional therapy, whatever it is, it takes a certain amount of discipline and dedication. And so you need that willingness in order to heal, and that's the miracle readiness. 44. The miracle is an expression of an inner awareness of Christ and the acceptance of his atonement. Christ is just another name of the sonship, of the one Son, of which Jesus is a part of. I know in traditional Christianity that Christ is synonymous with Jesus, but here it's synonymous with all of us, the healed part of all of us. So when it says it's miracle is an expression of an inner awareness of Christ, it's an expression of the inner awareness of the part of us that is at one with God. 45. A miracle is never lost. It may touch many people you have not even met and produce undreamed of changes in situations of which you are not even aware. And again, as we described in Principle 35, you may be forgiving someone and that person may not be in your life, or they may have passed over and you may never understand what that means on one level. But the Course is saying that that shift in perception, that love that you extend is never lost. It's always kept for us. 46. The Holy Spirit is the highest communication medium. Miracles do not involve this type of communication because they are temporary communication devices. When you return to your original form of communication with God by direct revelation, The need for miracles is over. The Holy Spirit is the highest communication medium because the Holy Spirit was created by God as a solution to the problem of separation. And so the Holy Spirit, once again, mediates between God and us. And that's the highest communication medium. Miracles in sentence 2 do not involve this type of communication because they are temporary communication devices, meaning the miracle is only necessary in the illusion, shifting in our mind from fear to love. And sentence 3, when you return to your original form of communication with God by direct revelation, the need for miracles is over. So when we learn our atonement lessons, when we learn our forgiveness lessons, when we heal our mind, then we are restored to the perfect oneness with God. In that case, we don't need the miracle anymore. The need for miracles is over. 47. The miracle is a learning device that lessens the need for time. It establishes an out-of-pattern time interval not under the usual laws of time. In this sense, it is timeless. So the reason that a miracle is a learning device that lessens the need for time is because the purpose of time is to learn our lessons of forgiveness, to learn to undo the belief in separation and heal our mind, be more loving, more kind, and have right-minded responses in all situations. And thus, that shift in perception, that miracle, is a learning device to help us achieve that goal. And the Course says that 5 minutes of a stilled mind saves you thousands of years, meaning that in that stillness, you remember the truth. You don't buy into the illusion as much. You come out of meditation or that stillness with a different perspective. And that then lessens the need for time. You heal more quickly because you're making right-minded decisions and right-minded choices. 48. The miracle is the only device at your immediate disposal for controlling time. Only revelation transcends it, having nothing to do with time at all. So the miracle controls time by lessening the need for time, as we just talked about in the previous miracle principle. In sentence 2, only revelation transcends it. Again, revelation is a direct experience with God. And that is completely beyond all time, having nothing to do with time at all. As I mentioned in the last episode, our shifts in perception, those miracles that we practice each day, asking to see a situation differently, asking to have our ego perception replaced by the vision of the Holy Spirit, or help me see this person as the Holy Spirit or God or you, Jesus, see this person. Each time that we have the little willingness to ask for that miracle, what we're doing is we're lessening the need to come back here over and over and over again. If you believe in the idea of reincarnation, that you're learning those lessons more quickly, and again, it's like putting money in a healing bank account, and it adds up to this direct experience eventually with God. That's how we return home, is by remembering the truth. 49. The miracle makes no distinction among degrees of misperception. It is a device for perception correction, effective quite apart from either the degree or the direction of the error. This is its true indiscriminateness. So this actually refers to the very first principle of miracles. Number 1, there is no order of difficulty in miracles. One is not harder or bigger than the other. They are all the same. All expressions of love are maximal. So in sentence number 1, the miracle makes no distinction among degrees of misperception. Again, no matter what the problem is that we're perceiving, whether it's a huge problem that we think of or small irritation, the Course says that all of these are the same. They're all a problem in perception. And thus the miracle then corrects the real problem, which is always the same. There's only one real problem, no matter what's occurring in our lives, and that is the problem of separation, the problem of this guilt, the problem of projecting that guilt, and all of the things that come from the projection of that guilt. Fear, anger, greed, violence, addiction, whatever that is, anxiety. And that's why the miracle doesn't discriminate. because it's focused on the problem in your mind, not the problem in the world. One thing that's hard for people to digest about the Course is that the Course is saying that every problem here is the same problem. One isn't bigger or harder. And of course, we don't believe that. And because we don't believe that, and because we don't see the truth in that, the problems then do appear as bigger or harder than others. It's only when we begin to understand that there's really only one problem that all of these problems will begin to heal. 50. The miracle compares what you have made with creation, accepting what is in accord with it as true, and rejecting what is out of accord as false. You may recall from an earlier podcast episode that when the Course uses the word made, mostly it's referring to ego. And when the word create is seen in the Course, that's referring to spirit. So, it compares what you have made, your ego perceptions, with creation. It compares your false ideas with what is the truth, accepting what is in accord with it as true and rejecting out what is out of accord as false. So true is love, peace, and unity. And if it doesn't reflect that, then it's false. And when it says it's rejecting what is out of accord as false, that means that those false thoughts, anything that isn't love, has no validity, meaning it isn't real. Again, it goes back to the summary of A Course in Miracles. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. And so that concludes the 50 Principles of Miracles. We made it. And we're going to move on to section 2, Revelation, Time, and Miracles, in our next podcast episode. And so if you would like to say the summary of A Course in Miracles with me, as I just said, that would be great. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.